Welcome back, fellow gamers. So I have for you today another Hidden Gems video for Commander. This time I want to focus on some reserve list cards that are actually pretty good and don't get that much play. Now, when I say they're pretty good, they're pretty situational, hence why they're Hidden Gems. If they were pretty good, they'd be really expensive and people would play them all the time. So, before I get started, this is the third video in my Hidden Gems series that I've done. You can check the other two videos up above in the card to the top right if you so desire. So these are not in any particular order. So number 5 and number 1 doesn't mean that 5 is better than 1. These are just in the order in which I list them. The first one is Spoils of Evil. So for 3 mana, 1 black, 2 generic. The ability is an instant, the card is an instant, and the ability is for each artifact or creature card in target opponent's graveyard, add a colorless mana to your mana pool and gain 1 life. So this is actually really good in situations where you want to generate mana, and black has a hard time of generating additional mana, and it's actually pretty good. So this is a card about 6 months ago was made aware to me through my other Hidden Gems video, and I've given it a bit of time. I wanted to see how good it would perform in the games that I was playing, and I gotta say I really enjoyed it, and I find it fits in well in a lot of mono black decks. So I played it in a Skithiryx deck, I've played it in an actual Marrow-Gnawer deck as well, where just I needed to generate additional mana quickly, and that was great. Also, it looked like maybe sometimes I'd be tapped out, so a player would start playing his stuff, and then I'd play this card to be able to play another card when my opponent was not expecting it. So while there's also life gain, and really that's not of any concern to me, it's really generating the additional mana, and this doesn't really get played in that many decks. So while I don't think this would be played in a deck that really needs to generate more mana, if you're not mana starved, I don't see a reason I'm playing this. I mean, it's an additional card taking up room in your library, so I wouldn't again play it in a lot of decks. But if you're playing mono black, it is worth consideration, because again, at least I have hard times generating additional mana from some of my black decks. Yeah, there's ways of, you know, getting good swamp production and doubling the amount of mana that your swamps produce and so on and so forth, or just plain mana rocks. Having an untelevised way of generating more mana all of a sudden will go a long way. I think I've repeated myself enough on this. The next card is Well of Knowledge. So this, again, is a reserve list card and was brought to my attention during another one of my Hidden Gem videos. So it is an artifact. You can pay 2 mana to draw a card. Any player may activate this ability, but only during his or her draw step. So you can use this as many times as you want, as stated on the card. Why is this a good idea? What happens if your opponent goes buck wild? Well, there are certain safe measures that I would use. So I would use Well of Knowledge 100% of the time in a deck like Nekuzar. Nekuzar punishes people for drawing additional cards, whereas if you wanted to go, if you have a way of generating infinite amounts of mana, you're essentially drawing as many cards as you want from the deck, not really having to worry about anything. So that's one way of going about it. But if you play in other cards like, let's say, Niv Mizzet, where you gain an advantage for drawing a card, you can theoretically ping an opponent to death with this card. It's honestly not that bad. It's a good win condition for certain decks that have it built a certain way. Now, yes, if you aren't, let's say, running Nekuzar, or you're worried about an opponent taking advantage of this, there are other countermeasures that you can play, like denying them the ability to draw additional cards. Having things like that make it one-sided for you and allowing you to really maintain control of the card that you're playing. So yeah, it does require a few pieces of play, and to just play it like that all of a sudden with no real rhyme or reason might not be the best idea. Now the next one is Ashdod Silex. So yes, this is like, what? 2 mana, it's an artifact that taps for 3, and then target player looks at the top 3 cards of his or her library and puts one of them back on top of his or her library, then exiles the rest. I actually like this as a play in case you start using Sensei's Divining Top, and you start realizing that the top of your deck isn't really that good. This allows you to get rid of, let's say, some land late game where you might not need any land, or if you wanted to use it against your opponent. Making them get rid of 2 out of the 3 cards is great. Sure, they're going to keep the best card, but if they're making tough decisions, if the top of their deck is great and they're making tough decisions, you're putting yourself in a good position because it's exile and stuff. So it could disrupt some combos. But I also like playing the card with a few other ones, namely, Exiles matters, obviously Oblivion Sower. If they start getting rid of a lot of the lands that are on the top of their deck and you play Oblivion Sower, you've just gotten yourself a bunch of extra lands. This is really narrow. I think this is probably the narrowest card that I'm going to even talk about ever for my Hidden Gems series. But I still think that it's worth mentioning because it really does not get played, I think, in any type of deck. It's crazy how little this card gets played. If you are, let's say, mid-game or late game and you're really running into a rut, this could be a lifesaver. Sure, you're paying 5 mana, but again, mid to late game, you should be able to generate significant amounts of mana anyways. And if you're not going to be using anything, if you've got a dry hand, the top of your deck is looking pretty bad, it's always a good way of mixing it up. Now, there are definitely shuffle effects you could use or other effects, but this is a different effect that I have used a few times now. So I acquired the card for like 20 cents. So going out and getting the card for 20 cents isn't really a bad investment, right? You never know what can happen down the line. Maybe this card ends up being a really good card going forward if ever Wizards of the Coast decides to start playing around with your own exiled cards. Now, yeah, Wizards has stated they really don't really want to go that route because they don't want the exile to be a second graveyard. But you never know what could happen. So that's another one. I also have Corpse Dance as one of the cards that you should have a look at. Now, it's an instant, which is good, for 3 mana, and a buyback of 2. So the buyback here is what's really relevant, and the ability is actually fairly unique, where it's you return the top creature card of your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, you're not allowed playing around with your graveyard. You can't all of a sudden put a card on top of your graveyard that maybe died near the beginning of the game. You really got to keep with the order in which the creatures went into the graveyard. That creature gains haste until the end of turn, and then you exile it at the beginning of the next end step. So there are ways of actually playing this card, getting a creature back, attacking with it, and then bouncing it back to your hand so it avoids the clause where it gets exiled. So it's an interesting way of providing recursion, and not that many people, again, play this card. The buyback 2 for me is relevant. For 5 mana, and maybe jumping through an extra hoop of just getting something back from your graveyard into your hand is relevant for me. And not only that, you get to keep the card because you're paying the additional 2 mana to buy back. So check it out. This is probably the most straightforward of the cards that I will mention. City of Shadows is probably more straightforward. So you exile a creature you control, you put a storage counter on City of Shadows, and then you can also tap City of Shadows for any amount of colorless mana equal to the storage counters that you have on this card. So the main way I like playing with this is by playing a type of red deck where I can take control of a lot of my opponent's creatures and just exile them. So do whatever I need to do, usually attack with them, use an ability, and then exile it. Because if it's an end of turn trigger, then you are able to really just, this becomes a removal card for you. Now, also another way of doing it is if a player is about to take control of one of your creatures, and it might be central to them winning the game or just putting on a massive hurt against you. This here is just, you're like, nope. Creatures exiled, forget about it. That's actually a really good way of going about it. I really like this because, again, it provides additional mana, but it also works as a removal or safeguard against whatever your opponents want to do. So there you have it. Those are the cards that I wanted to highlight for this anti-deck tech video. Let me know what you think, and let me know if you have any additional cards that you think I should highlight. I would love to include them in another video about Hidden Gems. If you'd like to check out some of my other videos, you can do that right now on screen, or if you'd like to subscribe, which, by the way, really helps the channel out and is greatly appreciated, you can also do that on the video as well. I'd like to thank you for making me a part of your day, and until next time, good gaming.